Okay, so today's my February wrap up. So I'm gonna talk about all the books that I finished in February, which is actually 8 books, which for me is crazy. All of last year, the most I ever finished in 1 month was 6 books, and I felt great about that. So 8 books feels incredible. I feel great about that. 2 of those books I started in January, and I read quite a lot of them in January, so I didn't read 8 books start to finish in February, but nonetheless. I read a total of 2,299 pages in February, which comes down to 82 pages a day, which feels great. I believe I had 79 pages a day in January, so I'm at pretty much the same number, just like a tiny bit higher. So that feels great. I'm really glad that I didn't drop down lower this month, which would have been weird because I read so many books, but they were shorter books, some of them. But I'm really glad I'm still at that, like 80 pages a day average. That feels great. Last year I had like 50 pages a day as my average, so I'm feeling really good about how much I'm reading. For genres, I had 5 fantasy, 1 classic, 1 horror, and 1 sci-fi. So mostly fantasy, but I did toss in a couple of other things as well. For age range, I had 7 adults and 1 middle grade. I'm not very diverse in my age range reading. Like, I really prefer adult novels almost always, but I did have 1 middle grade as well. For ratings, I had 2 5-star books, very exciting, 1 4.5-star book, 2 4-star books, 2 3.5-star books, and 1 2.5-star book. So my average rating is a 4. So that feels good. A 4 is really solid for me. So now I'll go chronologically and talk through each of the books that I read in the order of when I finished them. And the first book that I finished in February, that I read almost entirely in January, but I read like the last 80 pages in February, so it counts towards this month. And that was Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. Now, reading more Jane Austen was something that I put on my 2021 goals list, and I also believe I put this book on my 2021 project TBR. So I'm glad to be checking off both of those goals. Before this year, I had only read 1 Jane Austen, which was Pride and Prejudice, which I absolutely loved. That's one of my favorite books. So I was really happy to pick up another of Jane Austen's works to see if I would like it as much. Now, this is an adult classic, obviously. I feel like you all know that. It's about 2 sisters, or it's about a family of a mother and her 3 daughters, and what happens to them when the husband and father of the family passes away and the estate passes to his son from his first marriage. So the son comes in, the half-brother or the stepson comes in and he takes over. And so the mother and her 3 daughters have to move out. And they end up moving quite a bit away and living in a much smaller house, a much more modest house. And then it's about, their trials and tribulations with their new neighbors and, with love and all that. It mainly follows the 2 older daughters, Eleanor, who is, I believe, 19, and Marianne, who's like 16, 17 in the book. So they're, they're teenagers, but in the context of this book, they're, adults, but like young adults. I watched the movie before I read this book because I started reading the book once and I couldn't really get into it. And so to be able to get into it easier, I watched the movie before I gave the book another try. And while I do think that definitely made it a lot easier for me to get into this book, I don't think it was the right decision. Frankly, I have defended that as a good idea in some other videos. Like if you're struggling to get into a classic, like watch the movie first. And in a way, I still agree with that, but I think I would have in some ways enjoyed the book more, but also in some ways enjoyed the book less if I hadn't known how it was gonna end. Obviously, it would have been more of like a wild ride if I hadn't known what was gonna happen, especially when it came to like the main relationships, because with it being Jane Austen, there is quite a large focus in this book on like love and marriage. Frankly, I don't ship the main ships, really. Like, they're not my fave. Honestly, I ship one of the sisters with the man that the other sister ends up with, which is not correct. And I mean, obviously I knew who was gonna end up with whom based on having seen the movie, but still I shipped the wrong ship because I thought that made a lot more sense, honestly. I'm not gonna say what I'm shipping, obviously, but I feel like if you've read the book, then you probably know what I'm shipping. And so I don't know. I feel like there was quite a bit of telling instead of showing when it came to the relationships in this book, especially with one of the relationships that's established really early and that does end up being endgame. Their relationship being like getting established in the beginning of the book is really just told to us, like, oh, they fell in love, but we don't get to like see any of it. We barely get to like see him in those early parts, which made it really hard for me to really get attached to that relationship. So I don't know. I still liked this book. I gave it 4 stars. I still thought it was, a nice ride. I still like Jane Austen's writing style, but I do feel like I could tell that this was her first novel. Like there were still some kinks getting worked out, in like how she like structures her stories. I don't know. I feel like there were things that Pride and Prejudice definitely did better, I believe, especially when it came to the romance aspect. I didn't find this book all that romantic. I don't know. I also struggled a little bit with the age difference between one of the couples. I mean, there was a big age difference, but it was also the fact that he had like almost an adopted daughter who was like the same age as the girl who he was like pursuing and wanting to marry. And they're both like in their mid-teens, which to my, modern sensibilities is a little, ew. And it would have been easier if it was just the age thing, because then I can be like, okay, well, in this society, she is an adult. Like at this point in history, she's considered an adult, even if she's very young to me. But just the fact that he had like basically a daughter, like someone he treated as a daughter who was the same age, I thought that made it feel icky to me. But, that's my modern brain interrupting the story. But I liked it. I definitely want to read more Jane Austen, but I definitely didn't like it as much as Pride and Prejudice, because that's like a 5-star knock it out of the park kind of book for me, while this was, 4 stars. It was good. I liked it. Now, the second book that I finished in February was a big one. It was a big deal because it was A Memory of Light by Robert Jordan and A Memory of Light by Robert Jordan and Brandon Sanderson. It's big, it's heavy, it's hard to hold. And so this is the 14th and final book in the Wheel of Time series. So it's an adult fantasy. And whew, I don't even know what to say. I mean, I don't even know what to say, honestly. Like, if you don't know what the Wheel of Time is, it's a huge, epic, 14-book, 15 books if you count the prequel, fantasy series, very expansive world, tons of world building, thick books, chosen one, but like a twist on the chosen one, lots of magic, very structured magic system, very hard magic system, lots of stuff, a billion named characters. I had to use an app to keep track of the characters. That app is amazing though. You should, if you're planning to read these books, there's an app called the Wheel of Time Compendium or Companion. I don't know. It's an app. You can find it. Amazing. Very, very useful. Oof. I don't know with this book. Oh my god. It was 1150 pages in the edition that I was reading. So it was a long, long book. And there's a chapter in here. Chapter 37, The Last Battle, which is like 250 pages long. Apparently in word count, it's like longer than the first Harry Potter book. But I mean, that chapter is called The Last Battle, right? But this whole last book, this 1150 pages long book, is the last battle. Like there's, basically this entire book is battle. Like it's either like a giant battle scene with like armies crashing into each other, or it's like some kind of duel, or it's like some kind of strategizing, you know, in the command tent. Like, it's all pretty much, I mean, there was maybe a couple of things, but pretty much everything is battle in this book. And I know to a lot of people that might sound really boring, because I know a lot of people like to like skim or skip battle scenes, which I don't do. Like, I don't really relate to that. I find battle scenes can be really boring on like in movies, but in books I tend to enjoy them. Even though it's a huge book and it's basically all battle, I thought the pacing was really good. So the pacing is super fast. You jump perspectives so much, because in the start of the book, it's like 4 separate battles taking place like at the same time. So you're jumping in between them, and like eventually everything comes together to one, you know, giant battle, but you're still like jumping in between perspectives a lot, because obviously we have a lot of characters. And, you know, people started dying. I was on this like 1 hour bus ride there. I was going somewhere by myself, and so I was reading that whole like bus ride, and that was on that bus ride was when people started dying, and I was not ready, because the first death comes so fast, or like the first like kind of major character death is so abrupt, like you're not ready at all. And like, it's not poorly done, that's not what I mean by abrupt, but it was just so fast, and you're like, ah! So during that like 1 hour bus ride, I had to like cry like 3 separate times to like mourn different characters. It was it was a lot. The most major character death, like the biggest one, I guess, or like the most crucial character that died, I had been spoiled about, which I'm very sad to say, because it was before I got this great app, so I was Googling characters like an actual idiot. I was like trying to find out like how old a certain character was, and so I went up to the Wikia, and obviously it said like deceased in like the character info box, and I was like I like clicked away. So I knew that person was gonna die, which I didn't know when or how, but you know, once it started, you know, building up towards it, I wasn't surprised when it happened. Which makes me sad, because I think that scene would have had a lot more impact on me if I hadn't known that person was gonna die. Because, you know, knowing that person was gonna die and coming to this book with that person still alive, I knew they had to drop in this book, you know? So I think I didn't cry at that scene. I think, maybe a little. Because I was prepared for it. And I think if I hadn't been prepared for it, it would have shook me to my core, because I've fallen in love with that character so much. But it was a great book. It didn't end exactly how I expected, which I suppose is good, right? You don't want it to end exactly how you expected, but it also didn't end exactly how I wanted necessarily, or like, I don't know. I mean, I'm very satisfied. I feel content. Was everything perfect? Was every moment exactly how I would have preferred it to be? No. But that's never going to be the case with this massive of a series. It was very satisfying. I left this book feeling content, you know, being like, okay, I do not regret having read 15 books in this series. Like, I really don't. And I'm incredibly hyped for the TV show. I wish more people had died, honestly. I mean, this book is not old. This came out like 2015, I think. But The Wheel of Time started being published at the very start of the 90s. So the books do have a little bit more of a classic fantasy feel. And I mean, I feel like in classic fantasy there was more, you know, plot armor and less characters dying and all that kind of stuff. So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised, but I think with me having been not raised on, but almost raised on the Song of Ice and Fire series, I started reading those books when I was like 12, and am a huge fan of A Song of Ice and Fire. I think I expected more people to die. I am quite familiar with the feeling of main characters dying, and I quite expect it when they're in these, you know, kind of situations. Obviously, people did die. I mean, we did have, you know, important characters that didn't make it out, and, you know, people that I, you know, had to mourn. But I feel like too many people survived, honestly. Like, with this, like, last battle, cataclysmic event, I feel like more people should have died. That's my hot take. Do I want more people to have died? I mean, no, not necessarily. Obviously, I want them all to live happily ever after. But, you know, for the story, I feel like more people should have died. That sounds brutal, but that's just my feelings. I thought it was excellent. Was it perfect? No. But was it an incredible ending to a great series? Now that I'm looking back on it, yes, I gave it 5 stars. Not because it was perfect, but because I couldn't give it anything else. Like, with how I felt when I finished it, I had to give it 5 stars. I just had to. That being said, like, this is the first Wheel of Time book that has gotten 5 stars from me. So I guess this is my favorite Wheel of Time book. Which, I mean, yeah, honestly. Now, my sister has this thing that she does, like when she finishes a TV show, she like goes back and watches the first episode. Like, I don't know if she always does that, but she told me she does that at one time and it's just stuck in my head. So I really like that idea. And with having finished the Wheel of Time series, like it's such a massive series, it almost feels like you've watched like a 10-season TV show. So I wanted to do something similar, but obviously I wasn't gonna go back and like reread the whole first book again because, I mean, it's not a short book, you know. But I did want to do something. So we happen to own the first volume of the Eye of the World graphic novel adaptation. The Eye of the World is the first book in the Wheel of Time, and it's been turned into a graphic novel, so I believe it's 6 volumes. We only own the first one. But so I went back and right after I finished the last book, I read this graphic novel, which is like the very, very first portion of the first book. It's like up until they leave the village. So it's like all that cute stuff. So this is The Eye of the World, the graphic novel volume 1, which is the 3rd book that I finished in February by Robert Jordan, obviously adult fantasy. I enjoyed it. I liked going back and like seeing the beginning because wow, our characters have come far. Like it's crazy, like it's 14 books, but it really only takes place over like 3 years or something, which is insane how much goes down in 3 years and how far these people come. So I wanted to go back and like see their humble farm boy beginnings, farm girl beginnings. And I enjoyed it. I don't know if this is just me not being super into graphic novels, but I feel like you lose a lot in the adaptation from novel to graphic novel. Like you lose all of most of the like internal stuff, which is a lot of it, I feel, in, you know, a lot of the portions of this book. So I don't think it's as good as reading just the original text. Basically. The art wasn't my favorite. I thought some parts of the art were really, really nice, and some parts were like, I don't know. I thought the characters looked a little too similar at times. Like I was almost confused about which one was Matt and which one was Perrin, which should not happen. They don't look the same at all. They just both have dark hair. So I feel like sometimes the art was a little, you know, I don't know. But I mean, some of it was gorgeous, so I don't know. Maybe it was just wasn't my style. But so I gave it 3.5 stars because I gave the original first book 4 stars, and I did think this was a worse experience. So, but it wasn't bad. So, you know, 3.5 is where I landed, and I feel, you know, comfortable with that. I did think reading this right after finishing the last book was a really nice experience. If you have that option, then maybe do that. I'm not going to continue and read the rest of the graphic novel volumes because I mean I've read the first book and it wasn't that long ago, so I'm not gonna bother with that. But having this one at home already was an easy thing to do right after I finished the big book. Now the 4th book that I read is also a Wheel of Time thing. I wasn't ready to just jump into like something else right after. It didn't feel right. And so I needed more of a transition. I needed more, you know. So after that, I picked up The World of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan and Teresa Patterson. And so this is also adult fantasy. But this is like an encyclopedic work for the series. So I wanted to, you know, get all the beats. I love that kind of stuff, like all that world building stuff. It was fun. There was some like fun things, especially about like the Forsaken and stuff that I really enjoyed in this. But I have 2 issues with this book. 1, I don't like the art. No, I have 3 issues actually. 1, I don't like the art. Some of it's fine. Some of it I don't mind at all. Some of it I just thought was pretty hideous. Like, let's see if I can find a good example. Like, some of the character art I just really didn't like. Like, I thought some of the characters looked really weird, and I was just like, I don't know. I mean, it's not bad necessarily. It's not my style, and I didn't really like it. Some of the art was fine, but I don't know. Like, A bunch of it I just wasn't really into. I liked seeing the flags of the different nations drawn, because even though they're mentioned in the book a lot, I like could never remember which country had what flag. There were like a couple that I could remember, but most of them I was just like, oh, I don't know, which is a little strange for me because I like heraldry. I don't know. I didn't love that about the book. I thought some of the art was like, especially for me, who's read a fair bit of like world building stuff for the Song of Ice and Fire series, and I always think the art in that is gorgeous. So, you know, the comparison didn't really benefit this book. So that was an issue I had with it. Another issue I had is that I found some mistakes. Like there would be like a name of a place, and like in the title of that paragraph it would be spelled one way, and then in the paragraph the name would be spelled in a different way. So it's like it wasn't edited properly. And like there was a couple places where there was like a drawing of a flag and there was a description of the flag next to it, and it said like that it had blue stripes in the text, but then in the picture it had like white stripes. So I was like, hello? Like, I don't know, I felt like there was some oversight with it. I don't know if I can find, I don't remember what flag that happened with, but I remember it very distinctly. So I don't know, I'm not gonna try and find which flag that was, but I don't know. So I found a few mistakes that I thought could have been easily remedied, but it bothered me a little bit. And then also, and I think this might be a little bit of a main issue, is that this book was published only like midway through the series, which I didn't know when I originally bought it. I bought it from my boyfriend after he finished the series a couple of years ago. It was published like midway through the series. So obviously it doesn't cover like all the information in the series. Like there are like creatures that turn up later in the series and stuff that aren't in this book, because obviously they couldn't put them in the book because it would like spoil the series, or maybe Robert Jordan hadn't thought of them yet. I don't know. But I think that makes it worse as like an encyclopedic work, because it doesn't have everything. Far from it, honestly. So I think in that way it isn't ideal. I know there's another like world building companion book that came out after the whole series was completed. So I'm definitely gonna get that one as well and see if that one's better. I don't know. And I know that one is supposed to have like rankings of all the different like magic users and like who's the best. I want to see that. That sounds like fun, honestly. Love a good ranking. But I mean, I did enjoy this book. I thought it was a very good thing to read to kind of transition out of my Wheel of Time headspace. You know, like in that way it was very good. I didn't read it super fast. It's like 300 pages long and fairly large pages, obviously, but also, you know, a fair amount of art in it. And it took me like a week to read because I was reading it fairly slowly. Yeah, almost a week. It took me like 6 days to read. So it like really helped me kind of transition out of that Wheel of Time headspace, which I've been so in for like a year. And especially right at the end, obviously, you know, you're really in that headspace. So in that way, the book really served its purpose. And I gave it a 3.5, same as the graphic novel, because, I mean, it was enjoyable and there was stuff in there that I thought was really fun. And, you know, it was fun to kind of get it all compiled in one place and being able to like, oh, okay, so that's that country and oh, that's that country, because there are, you know, it's a huge world and some things you still get a little mixed up. But so I thought it served its purpose all right, but it wasn't like the perfect world building book for me. Now we're moving out of the Wheel of Time stuff, and the next 3 books that I have, I don't actually have on me, so I'll just have to put up a picture. But the first one is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Iain Reid, which is an adult horror kind of novella. It's only like 210 pages long, so it's not a novella, but it's very short. It's a very short novel. I read it in only a couple of days, and like how should I describe it, honestly? It's about a woman who is on a road trip with her boyfriend. They haven't been together for that long, and they're going to visit his parents on the family like farm, which is kind of remote, and you know, she has never been there before. In the car, she's thinking about like if she should end things, because it's called I'm Thinking of Ending Things, right? So she's thinking about whether or not she should end the relationship and break up with him. And she's also like thinking about like her past, and she's talking to him, and it's quite like highbrow. You know, they're both kind of like intellectuals. And then they go to the farm and they leave the farm, and on the way back they get stuck in a snowstorm, and they end up at the local high school, which is closed because it's the weekend, I think, or it's the evening at least. So there's no one there. And stuff ensue. I can't really, like, it's hard to describe this book in a way that makes it sound interesting because it's very mundane just on the surface. It's just like a woman in a car with her boyfriend going to his family's farm to visit. Like, it sounds like nothing happens, and frankly, not that much happens for a lot of the book. That's not really what it's about. It is a very mental journey. It's a very intrinsic thing. And also, it's a horror. Stuff happens, but I can't tell you about that, obviously. But even the horror aspects are very internal, very mental. It's not like a slasher flick. I really enjoyed it. It messed with my head. I had to really think about a couple things. I know some people say that, like, once you finish it, you should go back and, like, reread it immediately because it's, like, such a different experience the second time around. And I can imagine because the reveals at the end definitely change everything you've just seen. I didn't do that immediately, but at some point I would like to reread it knowing what I know now and see, like, how that changes my reading of the novel. So I'm glad I went into it without knowing what the ending would be. I did see, like, a tiny spoiler that kind of, like, helped me in the right direction, but I didn't quite figure it out. I was, like, on the path, but not quite. It was good. I really liked it. It was definitely creepy, but I didn't think it was, like, too bad for, like, a horror, especially for me who's quite easily frightened. I've seen some people refer to it as a thriller even, so some people don't even consider it a horror. So I don't think you have to be too scared to read it. I don't know, I really enjoyed it. I didn't really know what to do with it after I finished it. I was like, oh, whoa. Like, it was, I mean, it made sense, but it was strange, it's supposed to be strange. But I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. It wasn't perfect for me. I can't really put my finger on what exactly wasn't perfect. I thought maybe it was a little slow, and maybe I thought the reveal could have had maybe a little more impact, but I don't know. I still really liked it, so I gave it a 4. Now, the next book that I also do not have, because I lent both this one and I'm thinking of lending things to my sister because I need her to read them too. But the next one is Tilly and the Bookwanderers by Anna James, which is the first book in the Pages & Co. series, and it's a middle grade fantasy, which I have wanted to read for so long. I've been dying to pick up, honestly. It's about this girl, this, like, 11-year-old girl who lives with her grandparents because her mother disappeared, like, right after she was born, and she's never known her father. And so she's lived with her grandparents, who run a bookshop, and they live, like, adjoining to the bookshop. And she loves to read, and one day she notices a girl in the bookshop who looks a lot like one of her favorite book characters. And so things escalate, and she finds out that the book characters can come out of books and talk to her, or that especially that she can enter into books, which is what book wandering means. And then, stuff happens. Her friend who lives, like, across the street kind of gets involved in things, and, there's an antagonist that wants to stop them from doing things. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's incredibly, incredibly cute. It just warmed my heart. I felt so happy the whole time I was reading it. I loved it. And, it's a book about a book lover, basically for book lovers, especially if you're a child who loves to read, I'm sure you would love this book. But also if you're an adult who loves to read, I love this book. I wish it had existed when I was a child, but sadly it only came out a few years ago. But I still absolutely loved it now. I gave it 5 stars. I'd have to say it was my favorite from this month, even though the last Wheel of Time book was super impactful. I think this book just was quite perfect for me. It also really made me want to read the books that feature in the book, because one of the main reasons I so wanted to read it is because one of the characters she interacts with and one of the books she enters is Anne of Green Gables, which is one of my absolute favorite books of all time. So that just... But the other like main books that are important in it are Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and A Little Princess. I think that's what it's called. Yeah, A Little Princess, which I have never read. I hadn't even heard of, I think, until I started this book. And also Treasure Island features a little bit, not as much. So I really want to read those books now. Like, I've never really been that interested in Treasure Island or Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and I'd never heard of A Little Princess. But now that I've read them in this form, I am definitely really interested. But I thought it was, especially if you've read those stories and if you like grew up with those stories, I think it would be extra impactful. Like for me, who read Anne of Green Gables and loved Anne of Green Gables as a child and still loves it now, that especially made me love this book. But I think even if you haven't read those books, I think this book could be really impactful for you. Like if you love reading and you've ever felt like you wish you could enter your favorite story, I think you should read this book. If you're, in the mood for a cozy middle grade. And yeah, 5 stars. I'm absolutely gonna continue on with the series. I don't know exactly when. It's not gonna be next month, but it's definitely on my list for, stuff to pick up going forward. And I loved it. Now, the next book, the 7th book that I have, which is another book that I don't have on me because I borrowed it from my stepfather and I've already given it back. But that is Authority by Jeff VanderMeer, which is the 2nd book in the Southern Reach trilogy, which is an adult sci-fi series with some, horror themes as well. I read the first book in the series, Annihilation, in 2019, after having seen the movie, which I don't know how I feel about that, but honestly, it's a very different experience, book and movie, so I don't think it matters that much. I'd kind of forgot about it. I kind of forgot about that it was a series, but one of the goals I have this year is to really continue with series, and the Southern Reach trilogy, which was a series that was definitely on that list to get on with continuing. So I did that, but it's frankly, the 2nd book is very different from the first book. Like the Southern Reach trilogy is about this government agency called the Southern Reach, who are trying to deal with this phenomenon called Area X that just showed up. It's got this barrier, strange stuff happens. And so this agency wants to deal with this place and do stuff. And so in the first book, we're following this expedition of scientists going into the area. And our main character is a biologist who's, trying to take samples and stuff, and lots of stuff happens. In this 2nd book, we're following the new director of the agency who's coming in and trying to figure stuff out and kind of get everything under control because the agency's a little chaotic. So we're not in Area X at all in the 2nd book, which was surprising to me. We're just like at the office mostly, and there's a lot of like office politics and like him like figuring stuff out and like having beef with the assistant director. And I was a little like, I don't care about this. Like, I don't know. I didn't really care that much about his office drama or like his mommy issues, honestly. Like, it was very internal, a lot of it. It almost felt like a character study in some ways, but I just did not care about the character at all. I just, I don't care about this dude. And I didn't really care about the character in the first book either, but it didn't really matter because there was like interesting stuff going on and there was this really creepy vibe and all that. In this book, because this is supposed to be a sci-fi with some horror, right? And the horror was very light in this book, let's just say that. It wasn't super heavy in the first book either, like it's mainly a sci-fi. But there were stuff in the first book that I was very uncomfortable reading. I was like so creeped out. But in the 2nd book, like there was one scene that haunts me. It was just so, just made me uncomfortable in my skin. But it was really just that one scene. We had a couple of other things that you were like, oh, that's weird, or like, oh, a little disturbing, or like stuff that was like harking back to the original book, and like, so I was just kind of looking for like anything that had to do with the first book, and anything that had to do with like the unanswered questions from the first book, and there was very little satisfying answers provided. Now, I'd like to think that this book is like a middle book syndrome kind of thing, because it is the 2nd book in a trilogy, but based on what I've seen, it doesn't seem like the third book is that much better or better at all, really. I still want to read the third book because they're pretty short, and there are still things I want to know. Like, there are things that I'm just really hoping that the book will answer, but if the third book doesn't give me any of those answers, I will be incredibly disappointed. Let's just say that. But I didn't hate reading Authority. It was, like, fine-ish. Like, I gave it 2.5 stars, which is maybe a little high. Maybe it should just be a 2. I don't know. But 2.5, because, I mean, I was fine reading it for most part. Like, and there were some scenes that I was like, ooh, fun. And, like, that one scene that I hated, but that's what I wanted. So I was really happy reading it, even though I was very unhappy reading it. 2.5 stars. I'm definitely disappointed. I don't have high hopes for the next book, but I have put it on the pile. I've borrowed it from my stepfather, and I will get to it probably in April, based on how the stack's looking. But I just really hope it gives me some kind of satisfying conclusion. But honestly, I think you could just read the first book and be done with it. I think the first book was a strange but kind of cool experience. Second book, not worth it. I'm hoping that the third book will give me some stuff that will make me feel like, no, it was worth it to read the whole series, but I'm not feeling it right now. I also think length is a factor here, because the first book is only 200 pages long. It's a short, strange experience, but the second book and the third book as well is like 340 pages, so it's more of like a standard book, or like a fairly standard book. And I think that might just be too long. Like, I feel like the creepy vibes is better maintained over a shorter period of time. Plus, there was not at all as many creepy vibes in the second book, which is... I came for the creepy vibes, honestly. And I wasn't as creeped out as I wanted to be. But yeah, okay, last book that I've filmed for so long. We'll see how long this video gets when I edit it. But the last book is Uprooted by Naomi Novik, which is an adult, but young adult-ish fantasy. The reason why I say it's young adult-ish is because I've seen a lot of people say it's young adults, and it seems like it's often marketed as young adults. I think that has a lot to do with the main character's age, because she is 17. But I've seen several quotes from the author saying that she wrote it to be adults, but it does have like some young adult themes as well. So I don't know, maybe it would be called new adults, but that genre is, or like that age range is so vague to me, so I don't know. I'm just going to classify it as adult because the author has said repeatedly that she wrote it to be adult, so. But if you want to consider it young adult, it doesn't really matter to me. This is a standalone fantasy. It's about this girl called Agnieszka who lives in a small village in this valley. And in this valley, there's a super dark, super scary forest, which you're not supposed to go into. And sometimes monsters come out of it, and sometimes they snatch people, and sometimes people come back, like, all empty inside, and they, like, try to murder their family. Like, it's a very scary forest. And the lord of their, like, area, like, the local lord, is a wizard who lives in a tower, and he's called the Dragon. And he's a very distant lord. He, like, lets the people, like, self-govern pretty much. But the one thing he does do is, you know, help against the woods. He tries to, you know, keep the forest at bay and keep it back. And he also takes a girl every 10 years to go live with him in the tower. And so every 10 years he comes down. I mean, he comes down more often to, like, collect taxes and stuff, but every 10 years he comes and he takes a 17-year-old girl. It's always a 17-year-old, which I don't think was ever explained. The girls have to go with him, and they stay with him for 10 years, and then he lets them go again. So it's not like he's eating the girls or anything, but they come back, and they don't tend to stay long in the village. They always tend to leave. And so having your daughter be chosen, you lose her for 10 years, and then she probably won't stay even after she comes back. So you basically lose your child. Agnieszka is of the age that she will be in the selection lineup when the dragon comes. But she's not that worried about being chosen because often the dragon chooses, you know, the most beautiful girl or like the most special girl. And she has a best friend called Kasia, who is gorgeous and brave and kind and smart and like all the things. So everybody thinks that Cassia will be chosen, including Cassia herself and her family. They've like been preparing her to be chosen since she was like small, because they figured out quite early that she would probably be chosen. But obviously Cassia isn't the one chosen because she's not our main character. So our main character gets chosen and then things go from there. Now, I read this book because I am a big fan of Naomi Novik based on her Temeraire series, which is an alternative history fantasy about the Napoleonic Wars, but with dragons, which I love. It's 9 books. I've read them all. I love that series. So I've heard so much talk about this book on BookTube, so I figured, since it's Naomi Novik, and I've owned this book for a few years, my mother bought it for me, like, way back. I thought I would read this because a lot of people seem to like it, and I do like this author. But I didn't have super high hopes because I thought this was gonna be YA, first of all, which I don't think it really is. And I thought it was gonna be much heavier on the romance. I thought it was basically gonna be like a Beauty and the Beast YA fantasy romance thing. Which, it's not completely not that. I mean, there's definitely some of that in there, so me thinking that wasn't completely unfounded. But it's a lot more than that. And I liked it a lot more than I expected. The romance is light. I feel like when people talk about this book, they tend to talk about the romance, at least if they didn't like the book. It's all about the romance, because the dragon is an asshole for a lot of it, and he doesn't really improve, frankly. He's quite mean, he's almost abusive at times, at least verbally abusive. He doesn't like hit her, I think, at least not much. But he's very verbally abusive, and he's just really grumpy, and he doesn't like warm up really. Not much, at least. He warms up a tiny bit, but it's small. He's a lot older than our main character. Our main character is 17, and the dragon is like 200 years old or something, and he doesn't really age, because that's how it works with like magic users in this world. I didn't really mind all that. I didn't really care that much about the romance, but it was a small part of the book, frankly. It's a lot more just about Agnieszka and her like coming into her own, learning about her eventual powers. And it's about the battle against the woods, and it's about Agnieszka and her ties to this place and her like ties to her home. You know, her journey to defeat the woods and to understand the woods. And you know, it really wasn't that much about the relationship between Agnieszka and the dragon. I mean, that's in there, but to me, that wasn't at all the important part of the book. It was about Agnieszka, frankly. I also loved Cassia. I didn't think she was going to play much of a role besides being like, oh, the perfect girl who everyone thought would be chosen. But she ends up being really important for a lot of the book, and I grew to really love her. I thought she was an absolutely lovely character, and I loved the relationship between Cassia and Agnieszka. I thought their friendship was amazing. So if you want to read something with a great female friendship, I'd say this book would be great for that. But I don't know, I thought it was lovely. It's very fairy tale-esque, not in the Beauty and the Beast way, but just generally really has that feeling of a fairy tale. And I know some people might not like that, but I really did. I thought the ending was gorgeous. Obviously, I can't tell you about it, but I thought it was lovely. I think I was leaning towards a 4, but the like last 3 chapters really bumped this book up for me to a 4.5, which is what I ended up giving it. So, you know, it ended up really, you know, the ending really did it for me. Yeah, I thought it was great. It's very Eastern European-esque. The main country that they're in seems to be quite heavily inspired by Poland in like the 1600s. They have a neighboring country that seems to be quite Russian inspired, possibly, like based on the name of the country and everything. And the language they use when they do magic is apparently like Finnish, but also some other stuff, like, but partly like inspired by Finnish. So it's also a little, you know, Eastern. So I thought that was really interesting. The magic system is definitely soft, so be aware of that. If you only like hard magic systems, I think the magic in this would bother you. For me, it did bother me a tiny bit that there weren't more structure to it, but also with it being more of a fairy tale kind of thing, I thought it made a lot of sense for the magic to be a lot softer. So I grew to really like it. I was surprised, honestly. I didn't think I would like it as much as I ended up, even though I know I like the author. And after having read this, I really trust this author because this book ended up being a lot better than I had expected. 4.5 stars. So those were the 8 books that I finished in February. I'm very proud of myself with how many I managed to finish. We'll see if I can do that going forward. I don't necessarily think so, but we'll see. You never know, right? Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you back here next time.